We wanted to take some time to get deeper into the new Chia Plot format, and very graciously, Dr. Nick, we'll refer to just as Nick for the rest of the show, has agreed to come on and talk to us. So we have been dissecting the chips, we've been watching the AMAs, watching the YouTube tutorials, and we still have questions. So hopefully we can get into some of the meat of the matter. Welcome to the show, Nick. I really appreciate you having you join us here on FOMO. My first question for you is, how did you ever start looking into proofs of space and time? Because most of the people in the Chia community felt like Bram had solved this problem, like he had, presented a construction of a mathematical proof that was done and tested, and nobody was really thinking about it. And then no SSD and Gigahorse and all the rest of these things came on the scene. Were you part of any of those teams, or were you doing this independently?
It was completely independent. So I started because plotting was really painful. I kind of found Chia just after the mainnet launch. And then, the whole plotting experience back then was like pretty difficult. And then I was kind of incentivized to just kind of figure out a way to do plotting better. So that was kind of like the beginning. And
And the
then
first thing you reached for wasn't trying to do RAM plotting or anything like that. You didn't reach for hardware. You said, I'm going to look into the math.
no, it was actually I want to do it in RAM first, and so Mad Max had just kind of he started working on his, and I kind of saw like the first 2 weeks of his development, and so I was like, oh, I'm pretty sure he's going to be able to do this in the time that he said, and then he built this amazing software, and I'd already done a version where I was trying to do it in 128 gigs of RAM because that was a machine I had at home, and it was just kind of a challenge for me there. And then I kept once you stop building the plot, you kind of realize, oh, like maybe there's a way to to look at the math behind this, like see if there's you can get additional compression out of it and so on. And there was like many times where I thought, oh, I found a trick to kind of compress it, but then it didn't work out. And then I'm like, oh, I'm just going through the information theory and just kind of learning more about it. And then eventually I figured out the bit dropping stuff. And this is before NoSSD released their stuff. So that when NoSSD released theirs, I knew, oh no, this is they found the same sort of thing. But I was sort of stuck on what can I do with this technology. So I was working towards doing this bit dropping stuff, seeing how far I could do it, and then see how I could use it either to my own advantage or try to release it somehow. But it wasn't clear how you could release it and still kind of monetize it in a certain way. And so I think NoSSD showed people how you could do that, and then Max came out with his. But I was always kind of 1 or 2 steps ahead of the compression, but it kept taking longer and longer because I didn't want to release something that had the same compression as everybody else. So I kind of took it to the next step each time. And then finally I got it out, after the 50% compression zone. And, I was like, okay, I'll just go to the max compression that I can think of and then work backwards from there. But then after I released it, then it was too much. And then she decided to, maybe start doing something about all the compression stuff.
So, did all of these camps employ the same technique to break the proof of space? And do you think that that's a right way to phrase it? That the original proof of space that was proposed by Bram and the rest of the team, that that proof of space construction is fundamentally broken?
No, I wouldn't say it's broken. I think it's just you can always trade some energy for space, and yeah, so you're still proving that you have the space. It's just that you're kind of reconstructing more than you should have done, right? Like you could just if everybody could plot in like 1 second, and you could produce a plot of 100 gigabytes in 1 second, nobody would actually store that space, right? So you can still, yeah, it's kind of an interesting construct. Like there's always going to be some level of bit dropping that you could get, and then is it proof of space? Well, yes, it is, because it's just so much more economical to keep it stored than to run the energy on it. So yeah, I would say the original concept was almost there. They just the early bit dropping stuff was the obvious stuff, which is you take the first table and you just reduce the bits off of there. So I think the first series of bit dropping where everyone kind of had the same idea, like no SSD and Mad Max and Blade Bit, they were all kind of doing the same thing. It was the next level that started to do some more interesting stuff, and the way that Mad Max did it was different than OSSD. And I had some conversations with Max after I released Dr. Plotter. And we kind of, tried to trade some information without revealing too much, just to see what the other person knew. And no SSD was a little bit of mystery at that time. And then after a few of our conversations, and I think he went off and did his, last pod format, and by then I'd figured out like exactly what NoSSD been doing. And I started using that information in order to construct a new proof of space that these sort of things weren't possible anymore.
What was no SSD doing that was so different from what Mad Max was doing?
So the original plot format, it's the challenge comes in from the root of the tree. So, and then it goes all the way down to the leaves and it collects the information from the leaves. What that lets you do is it lets you kind of reorder stuff as you go down the tree. And there's some interesting things that you can do with the data so that you can move things around before it hits the leaves. And then that way you can kind of save more bits there. And that led to some really kind of difficult to protect against attacks. And one of the reasons that there was this whole scan filter introduced was to kind of prevent the attacker from being able to reorganize leaves and kind of group them in different components, and then you can bit drop on the back pointers to those leaves. And so I don't know for sure if NoSSD is doing that because it's all closed source, but the numbers kind of added up to me. So they were able to get just that little bit of an edge over Max's stuff at that time.
So when the original proofs of space and time were being contemplated and worked on by the team that did it, there were papers that were published. Is there a similar paper that we expect to see of what you guys have been working on now? Like, is that the level of rigor that this has gone through, and is that what we should be seeing on the horizon at some point?
That's actually a good question. I don't know how. There might be a post-mortem on the old plot format, but there was also a question asked on the last AMA, like, did you guys prove that bit dropping is not possible? And Bram gave a response to that, which is like, it's very difficult to actually figure out what it is that you need to prove is not possible. And the approach that I took was just, limit the number of things an attacker could do, then show that, we closed off a lot of those avenues, and then proposed a bunch of attacks that could be done, and then show that those attacks, were just not economically viable. So it's difficult to say, oh, this proof of space, cannot be bit dropped, or it's, it's impossible to compress, because it's like, well, it's almost like one of those things where it's like you have to find a counterexample to show that it can be done, rather than try to figure out a way to prove that it can't be done, right? So
Yeah,
how do you?
it's like one of those age-old problems of trying to prove a negative. That's not what we're trying to do. I guess I was curious if these constructions that have been done during that time frame, circa 2017, and when Chia was first being contemplated, and they were originating the ideas of proof of space, and then when they had to add in proof of time to mitigate certain things that had come up, it made me think about, well, are these proofs and are these papers still valid, or was there some flaw fundamentally in here that was missed?
Yeah, I don't. I think the thing that was just missed was the simpler application of just bit dropping. The Hellman attacks, they kind of construct a smaller table from which you do a much quicker reconstruction from the data. That's not feasible in the new format at all, but it was something that when Bram was building the proof of space, he didn't have this multi-layered table construct that we're still using it today. And the Hellman was just that came out of protecting against the Hellman attacks, basically, because the Hellman, if could drop one table, but you couldn't make it drop 7 or 8 tables if your proof of space was sequentially going through and building each table. So yeah, they did miss some things, I would say, just because the bit dropping is a much simpler and just very grindy way of kind of reconstructing data.
Well, I also heard that one of the things that provided the security in the original proof of space construction was some of the sorting. Did that resonate? Did I get that right? Because I seem to remember either Bram or somebody else saying that when they started to go through the mechanisms under which proof of space actually worked, that part of the thing that made it really hard, or that introduced a hardware constraint, was some of the sorts that were part of the original construction of the proof of space.
Yeah, that's when we started working on the new proof of space. That was basically the first thing that I was relaying to Bram, was that it's not the first table has this like hash that gets applied, and that hash is very fast to do on a GPU. You can do like a K32, which is like 4 billion entries, and you can do that in under 30 milliseconds. And I think that was supposed to be the original kind of barrier to being able to, kind of grind the proof. And it turns out that in the original format, the difficult part was the matching algorithm. There was like this the way that you test to see whether these two pairs match to make the next element in the table, and then you got to sort the entire table because those matching pairs are within within specific bounds. That sorting was the most effort. It was like way more effort than just doing the hashing, and that kind of saved the old plot format, was the difficulty with which to organize the data so that you can do the pairing. And of all the attacks, like most of the time is spent doing the pairing.
So is that same pairing mechanism employed? Did you amp that up? Because I know that one of the things that you talked about in the recent discussions and videos that you presented is that there's certain difficulty barriers and the orders of magnitude on some of the difficulty barriers. I was wondering if you could get into that in a bit more detail. Does it have to do with matching or sorting, or is the
Yeah,
barrier
it
really?
actually has to do with matching. So the in the original proof of space, you basically iterated. There's this variable that was like called m, and there was 64 possibilities of m, and you had to like basically see if, as you tried to pair two things, see, of the 64 possibilities, was one of those m's within this like hash, like collision uh, range. And then so you had to like hash through those 64 possibilities into the small memory space. And in the new matching algorithm, it's kind of taken to uh, like a much wider memory space, so you can't get it inside like a GPU kernel. So it kind of goes across the memory space, so that you're iterating on these they're called match keys. So you have a left side pair and a right side pair, and the left side pair has 64 match keys that need to then hash into the right side pair. And you do that across a much bigger memory space. So you're kind of doing these global memory lookups. And the number of match bits basically dictates how many possibilities, and kind of arranges the space so that you just have to do more hashing to find the ones that match. And it basically translates into the most optimal way to do it is to hash all the data and then sort all the data, and then you have two sorted lists and you compare those lists. So there's a lot of work to do that, and we can tune up how difficult it is to match just by increasing the number of match bits. And so, for instance, right now all the tables have 2 match bits, which means that they need to do 2 squared, so 4 iterations of all these matches across the memory space. And that just takes some time. It's like a grinding thing to find where the match is going to collide with the other side. And
So
so
is this theoretical, or does it put us on a treadmill? Because I know that one thing when people think about these different types of proof of work, like Bitcoin has taken the approach of we're going to do this as simple a thing as possible. And so the only thing to do is to try to optimize for the hardware that's capable of doing this extremely simple operation. But proofs of space and time seem like it's bigger. It's a little bit more complex because we're trying to, in some ways, shift that proof of work to being a one-time operation. But I'm curious if this puts us on a treadmill of if NVIDIA can come in here and just, at some point, is there a time horizon like 3 to 5 years out where they have so substantively increased the processing power that certain parts of the construction need to be revisited, or do you feel like you have something that's resilient over some 20 to 50-year time span?
It's resilient because we can schedule the difficulty. So that hashing, it does two main things that are work-based. So the one is the actual just computation of the hash, which is related to the number of T-flops a graphics card has. And then the other one is the memory lookup, which is related to the memory bandwidth of the card. So if the memory bandwidth of the card improves, then the time to do that matching will improve. And if the T-flops improve, then that'll also kind of improve it somewhat. So each generation of graphics cards usually kind of go up together. I mean, the 3090 and the 4090 had kind of the same bandwidth. So the 4090 could have been better if it had a better bandwidth, but the 4090's processor was like twice as fast. So it kind of, is it going to be 50% faster or 25% faster or 100% faster? It's kind of hard to tell until you actually test it. But that plot difficulty setting happens on the third table for the matching stuff. I can get into like why a little bit later, maybe.
Well, I guess the question that I've got though is this something that's going to be reactive within the blockchain itself? Like we've had difficulty adjustments, like the blockchain tries to self-heal and actually regulate for the amount of blocks that are created during a certain time because it's reactive to whatever the network is capable of doing. So is that part of what's happening with the proof of space here? Is that the new proof of space construction is that it's reactive in some way to what's going on with the network? Because I remember in the early days, there was a lot of discussion about whether K32 could stand the test of time. And it was repeated that the K32 plot size was going to be good, it was going to work, and there was skepticism that some people said, well, I'm going to plot K33s or K34s because it just seems to me that this is not a construction that can last for a super long period of time. And I guess I'm curious if they got that so fundamentally wrong because this bit dropping technique just wasn't known, or if that there is some reactiveness that's built into what's going on here that can make the new K28 stand the test of time.
So the thing about the K sizes is they don't affect security much, if at all. I think maybe back then they thought, oh, the K34s have more security than the K32s because it needs more resource plot. But this time around, we kind of came from the approach that assume that an attacker has a supercomputer and everything fits into RAM and there's no bottleneck to writing to disk or transferring over PCIe or anything like that. So the grinding of a K32 or a K28 has the same end result because the K28 will grind quicker, but the space that you grind is proportionally smaller.
That
Right?
kind of reminds me of the proof of time. I mean, a proof of time, essentially, it's that there are a chained set of operations that ensures that a certain amount of time has elapsed. Is there a component of that that's involved in the algorithm that like enforces it? Because if you're assuming that there's a supercomputer that can do things, I don't know, relatively infinitely fast, what is it that mitigates that it can't just fake out the space? Because the barrier is not on a computational level, then it has to be on some sort of a iterative level, right? Or am I getting that
Yeah,
right?
so a supercomputer can fake the space, and uh, we we kind of base all the grinding effort on, how many H100s or how many, what kind of supercomputer is needed to, spoof 50% of the network, because then you can start doing some bad things with the network and stuff like that. So the grinding time for the honest plotter would have to be proportional to how many H100s or an attacker could collect. So you, to try to figure out what is that number, like how big of a supercomputer do we need to guard against, is a little bit kind of maybe hand wavy. But I talked with Gene about that. He basically said, I like to be resistant to 5 million H100 GPUs, and his thinking was just that I think that's about 5% of the expected market in 2027 or something like that, and it would be incredibly difficult for any entity to get 5 million GPUs available to just run at the same time. And in the future, if that number goes up, then we schedule the plot difficulty increase so that any plots that were made with a plot difficulty value lower than what the consensus is going to accept will then expire, and you have to replot those ones. But
So
I'm not.
I guess
Yeah.
I guess that's a question then, is should we expect for people that are thinking about Chia in the long term, that plotting is something that is not going to be a one-time operation, but is going to be on a cadence? Or should people be picking a bit bigger, higher difficulty numbers so that they can reduce the amount of plotting they're actually going to have to do?
Yeah, so a plot made today isn't going to last for 100 years. But your hardware is not going to last for 100 years either. So there's going to be some sort of logical time frame in which you're going to make a plot and then expect to store it. And like you could and this is up for discussion with the chips and all that, because there are chips that deal with the difficulty settings and the scheduling. And like my thinking is basically let's let everyone plot today with the lowest difficulty setting that we think is going to hold up for at least a few years. That way, you could plot, yeah.
If on that point, if we were to pick something substantively higher, like what would the ramification be? That you'd have a higher requirement for what could produce a valid plot? Would it mean that instead of being able to plot with a TI 1080 or a 3060, that you'd have to have a 4090 or something like that to be able to create a plot? Is what is that trade-off for setting that difficulty on the far end of the spectrum? Like if we were to think about how this conversation might evolve, I think that there would be people in the community who would remember that K32 conversation and say maybe we erred on the side of it was not the right way to approach it. So let's maybe not say what's the lowest difficulty we can pick that we think will have some longevity, but rather what's the highest difficulty that we can pick that doesn't introduce too high of a barrier to plotting.
Yeah, it's going to be somewhere in between that. So if you pick a really high difficulty, what you're basically saying is, oh, we don't want resistance against 5 million H100s, we want resistance against 50 million. And that translates to the person doing the plotting to plot longer in order to have the resistance for the 50 million instead of the 5 million. So with 5 million H100s, a 3060 could conceivably plot in about with 40 terabytes per day, like give or take. So if you wanted to increase the difficulty today to 50 million or 500 million H100s, you're going to go down from 40 terabytes per day to 4 terabytes per day, or to 400 gigabytes per day. And 400 gigabytes per day is going to be too slow for anyone to want to replot their farm. If you have like 20 terabytes, it's going to take you, weeks. And if you're a petabyte farmer and you don't have like 30 GPUs going, I don't know how long that's going to take. So, yeah, there's that balance between what's a good number today that's going to last for 5 years, 10 years, and is that still going to be an acceptable plotting time for most farmers? It turns out that 5 million H100s is very slow for CPU plotting. So CPU plotting is already below 1 terabyte per day at that number. So that's already kind of, stopping people from being able to plot any substantial size farm with a CPU. So that's kind of already been pushed out in favor of a longer like plot today that will last.
I know that internally at Chia that JM was one of the individuals who was on the vanguard of the plot compression, and he had a lab and all kinds of access to hardware. So have you guys been running through different scenarios, and do you have access to all the graphics cards so that you guys can run some of these tests to say, or at least help to inform that conversation? Because if the community comes in here and says, well, we really don't want this super low, 5 million number, like we'd prefer to go something more conservative, I don't know, maybe 15 million. And that would mean that instead of being able to do 40 terabytes, you can only do 17 or something like that with a certain set of graphics cards. Is all of this going to be framed up in a way that CNI is presenting it and saying, here are the trade-offs, here are what you're getting into, and here's how to vote or how to conduct ourselves when we're having the discussion about how we adopt this chip?
Yeah, for sure. So the proof of space chip is basically in draft. There's still a number of benchmarks I need to do so I can present the kind of the results. But we can only have those benchmarks once we have a bit more of a production level of optimization, because that's going to define how quickly we can do the plots, which also defines how quickly an attacker can use this rental attack to see how fast an H100 would be able to do it. So once I have the optimized production code, then I would run it on an H100 and then see what time that is, and then adjust the settings based on that. And that's once those results are out, then of course the community can come in and be like, we'd like to plot slower or plot faster, or things like that. And there's a second chip that's out that deals with the scheduling, and the scheduling influences things like the plot ID filter and some other filters, and also dictates, what the difficulty for the plot difficulty is going to be, like that grind time to make the plot. And that's all open for discussion. As like you said, why not plot more difficult today and then not really worry about it for a much longer time? That's all open to the community to discuss through those chips.
When I was working on plotting and some of this stuff on the projects that I was working on, we had people approach us and say, I think I can beat what's currently happening with an FPGA, a field programmable gate array. Is that something that would actually cause a speed up here, or is a GPU sufficiently the same sort of parallelization or like optimization? Is there any utility for an FPGA that can come in here and do something? I imagine an ASIC probably is not the right answer unless you were to, I don't know, get multiple different pieces of equipment chained together in such a way that you can make this really, really fast and optimize certain pieces in some pipeline or something like that. Is there any special purpose hardware that could potentially help somebody who wants to plot really, really fast?
It's kind of difficult to answer, because how do you protect against an ASIC? And the plotting software is quite complicated, so I imagine it would be quite difficult to build one, but it's it's never impossible. It's just a question of cost. The FPGAs, I think they are efficient, but they're not particularly fast. They're not going to be faster than like a high-end consumer graphics card, I don't think. So it's debatable like how much value they would bring to you, especially since like the plot format as it stands, it doesn't need any grinding from the honest farmer. It only needs it when it finds an actual proof. How can that be leveraged with the FPGA? Well, I mean, if you can make a plotter out of it, I'm not sure, maybe that'll save some energy in doing the plotting, but in terms of an attack, you would need to do it pretty fast. I don't know how possible that is. I'm not an expert on FPGAs. I did talk to some people at Chia about it, and they were basically not they were not thinking that it was going to be very possible with FPGAs. They're kind of more of a prototyping thing for the ASICs.
And Nick, I've heard mention of the Benesh compression that is being used in this new plot format. How did you guys arrive at Benesh compression, and can you go into some of the details? I know you mentioned earlier that no SSD. Your suspicion was that they were rearranging information from the root of the tree, and was it that understanding of what no SSD was doing that led to the decision for Benesh?
No, this was I think it was something in the back of Bram's mind for a while, and he was working with Dan Bonnet, who's at Stanford, and they basically like made a post about this at some point, and but they just didn't really know how to apply it, and then we just kind of figured out more how to apply it like practically, and yeah, the compression savings from it could be applied to any of the proof of space. So like what it does is it can save about 2 to 3 bits per table. And so the more, depending on the K size, so 2 to 3 bits of a K28, is coming up to like 10%, which is quite a lot of savings, just from like a better compression algorithm. Yeah, but that was kind of more in the background for a while, and then we just kind of finally like figured out how to actually apply it to the tables, and yeah.
Have Dan Bonnet and Christoph Pirzek sort of been involved on this go around? Are they? I know you mentioned.
So Christoph has been a part of. We had a weekly meeting every week. Yeah, and Christoph was always kind of listening in on those. And so the Christoph and Bram are more the information theory specialists. So anything related to compression and how to optimize the structures, or like general security at an information theory level, they were like really the experts at that. I was more understanding the information theory, figuring out how to apply it, figuring the engineering side of things, which is related to how fast can GPUs do things, what are the weaknesses, what can be ground. Yeah, and so I would take these ideas, work on them, come back the next week, present the ideas, go over it again, and that just kept going and kept going. So it was kind of a really, like, for me, it was really fun interplay between the different disciplines, and just kind of trying to like keep pushing it forward, keep pushing it forward. And so I think we finally landed on something where I'm pretty happy with it, and there's no niggly bits that kind of feel off. I feel like it all just kind of came into place in the last couple of months.
So this compression technique, is it something that would have been available to put into the original proof of
Yeah,
space, or
yeah, like even the Mad Max new plot format you could apply this compression to it, so you could
are you
already
talking
like
about the MMX chain? Is that
the
what you
MMX.
mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So you could compress the MMX plot format by 10% with it. The challenge though would be it would probably be SSD only, because the way that it works is it takes a permutation, and with that permutation you have to go from one left side of the permutation to the right side of the permutation, and it does that by traversing this kind of network of bits. And when you have something as large as a K32, then you have lots of layers of these bits, and then the hard drive would have to basically look for one bit in one location, another bit in another location, and so on, and kind of go through this network. And there's ways to optimize it so that the bits can be kind of co-located on disk a little better, and we spend a lot of time figuring that out. But ultimately, that even in the best case of organizing all your data together, you can have at least 3 times as many reads as a non-Benesh compressed stuff. So That
And
was
what you were just mentioning, this has to do with the physical limitation of spinning disks.
yeah,
It's the read head in the amount that that head has to mechanically move. So the SSD can do things where it doesn't have to move a read head around. It just has to marshal bits into the bus and whatever. But like on a spinning disk, it's the platter's actually got to spin. You got to pick up the right bits. And so if there's a lot of not sequential reads, if all the data isn't very much next to each other, co-located, I think was the word that you said.
yeah.
Um, that makes it really difficult to get the data off the drive in the right amount of time.
Yeah, and one of the early designs for the proof of space was basically to extend the number of tables to 9. That's kind of similar to the MMX format. But then when you have Benesch compression on that number of tables, you got to do like 3 reads to go down to each child, and then the number of children is now grown. And so it's like, okay, you find a proof, let's say you find a proof quickly and you don't use that many reads, but now you got to get the whole proof from this. Now you got to read 3 times all those layers all the way down, and it's going to take like 5, 6, 8 seconds, 10 seconds to get the entire proof off of disk, just from the random disk seeks alone. So it was a real problem to try to not split the format into 2 separate components like SSD and HDD, because you would have one group that could use Benesch compression and it would just go for SSDs, and then the other group that wouldn't use it, but their plots would be 10% bigger, but you could put it on hard disks. And there was also construction problems because those random, well, not random bits, but those bits that make up the network, they're all in random spaces in memory, and you just gotta work one bit at a time through random memory, and that takes a long long time, like even for a GPU, and it's like a difficult to parallelize algorithm to construct these Benesch networks. So that's where the partitioning of the data comes in, because then it kind of lets you build these kind of random lookups in a much smaller memory space, which speeds up the whole thing, and then made it possible for both SSD and hard drives just by co-locating all the data into whatever the challenge needs and having a bigger read.
Does this feel to you like you're rebooting Chia, or is this just an incremental improvement on the plot format that was a natural consequence of time went on and it just sort of the weaknesses were found and you guys are addressing the weaknesses?
I think the only reboot that could apply is for the Nakamoto consensus. That it might help in that sense because there's less of these third-party providers that are kind of centralizing the plotting, like the proof of
Does
space.
this shut all that down? Like, does this mean we wave goodbye to no SSD and Mad Max and Gigahorse and all this? Do all of the and Dr. Plotter, do all of these go away because of what you guys have invented here? Have you essentially killed the multi camps that existed on Chia?
It kills all the existing plots. So, like, there's a transition period where the existing plots will have no value at all. And anyone that's on those old plots, like using NoSSD, they just wouldn't have any weight in the network anymore. It doesn't stop NoSSD from releasing another service where it makes plotting easier or the farming easier, and then they choose to go centralize it again. Like, it's not going to stop that. But the motivation to use NoSSD isn't going to be, oh, I can get ultra compressed plots in they have the most competitive compression of plots, or what have you. So they're not going to be able to pitch that as their selling point for, hey, go the centralized route with us.
Because
What
that was the selling point is you'll have more efficiency on your drives, so you're going to get more earnings, and so paying some small fee to whatever centralized developer or group that exists is worth it because I'm going to get 30% more. Why don't I give 5% to these guys? It's not that big of a deal. So I don't care about Nakamoto consensus. I want more money.
Yeah, and so that's kind of the reset the new plot format will do, is that I don't think that any of these third party providers are going to be able to even get 1% compression. And so then how are they going to collect a fee or motivate someone to use their software. But like I said, if they provide a service that is much more friendly than the like what Chia is able to bring out in terms of like ease of farming or ease of making plots, then people could use their third-party service, and hopefully, if they do have something that the community really likes, that they at least let the farmers sign their own blocks and put their own blocks into the chain rather than having OSSD do it and centralizing everything.
So we're kind of coming to the end of the hour. I've got one last question on engaging on the Chia improvement process. So as we have people in the Chia community that listen to this, listen to the other AMAs, kind of get up to speed on the plot format, what's the right process to engage? Is it just to go to the GitHub and start it in on the conversation there with posting a comment, or what's your hope on the community or the people who have a stake in the game in this particular improvement on Chia to engage on the process, and how and where should they be looking to get involved in that conversation?
Yeah, I think if you have any questions where you're still learning, then like posting on Discord in the Proof of Space channel, I kind of look at that one a lot, and I answer the questions there if there's anyone that needs like clarification or things there. If you have ideas or strong feelings about what the Proof of Space is and you've done some research on it, then you can go ahead and post a comment to the Proof of Space chip. I think it's chip 48. And if you have like ideas about the scheduling, like you want the Proof of Space to be scheduled sooner and not have the transition period be like so long, or you want it shorter, or what have you, or maybe you have different ideas on the weightings of how those proofs of space are supposed to go, then either discuss in the Discord first, or go ahead and like post your ideas on the actual chip.
Well, we'll throw some links out there. I put them on the screen kind of rapid fire as you were talking about it. So I think that's yeah, chip 48 and 49. The one is, if you've got ideas about that difficulty trade-off and some of the things that we talked about early on in this discussion, probably 160 and chip 48 is the one to go to on when will the plots retire, what is this period, kind of what is the time frame under which these phase-in things occur. That's on chip 49 and on 161. And when we're talking about the Discord, that's, you got to get to the Chia discussion Discord, and there's a channel in there, and you can engage with Dr. Nick. He's going to be there over the next period of time, answering questions and engaging further. So if you're looking to follow up on this and you're feeling like you now are grounded and you've got some amount that you want to weigh in on, then these are the places to go hit up. So we'll be watching for the community to actively engage in this conversation, and really appreciate you coming on, Nick. It was a fascinating conversation, and really appreciate you giving us a bit more detail on what's happening with the new plot format.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
All right, and we'll see you next time on FOMO.
All right.